Dr. Trina Coleman, host of Beyond the Classroom on HBCU Smart TV and HBCU iRadio. We're here on site at the Virginia Air and Space Center, and you can see all the cool exhibits behind me. And today I'll be interviewing Dr. Christine Darden, and she just received the Congressional Medal of Honor for being one of the hidden figures. So Dr. Darden and I are going to discuss some things about her time at HBCUs, her time at NASA, the work she did, and of course we're going to talk about the medal, and we're going to talk a little bit about the book. I am very excited about doing this because I'm doing it for HBCU Smart TV. I'm talking to a smart woman, and that's an understatement. And we're talking about relevant things that have happened for African Americans.
Oh, absolutely.
And the thing that I also want to talk about is the fact that our HBCUs are the schools that those women had to go to. I mean, they could have gone to other schools, but they would have had a big old fight. But particularly Miss Johnson, Miss Catherine as I call her, and Mary Jackson and Dorothy Vaughan. All of them went to HBCUs. They're brilliant women. I went to an HBCU. I'm a brilliant woman. You know, and
honestly, the modesty.
Oh yeah, well hey, you know, academic.
You have to be that.
Academic blue blood is my brand, and that's for a reason.
I know, I get it, but I'm saying. Like,
sure, no, but it's legitimate because I went to an HBCU. It's not where you go; it's who you learn from. I'll say that again. It's not where you go. It's who you learn from. HBCU Smart TV, HBCU Nation Radio. Talk to our alums, our students, our faculty, our staff, advocates, supporters, the uninformed, everybody. This is where it went down. And you know, and I can't wait till she gets here. Where is she? No, we have like another hour or so, but you know, I'm just excited, and you know, that's an understatement, and I can't say it enough. Look, HBCU Nation, here's what's about to go down. I am going to partake in an experiment that may not be all of that, I'll say, attractive to my persona, but I am willing to try this thing out, and there's a flight simulator, and all of that is called Max Flight. Now, right away, you know the name Max means it's going to be like the ultimate experience. Here we go. I'm going to do the Max Flight. Watch this. Come on, let me in. I know you.
1 to
you
10.
Can't wait.
Honestly, wow.
That
Are you seriously going to do that?
That belt don't work. You can kiss. I mean,
you got that up there, man.
Is that on the tape, James?
It's policy rules right here.
It's a telemarketer calling me, so I'm going to scream anyway. I'm going to say to stop. Okay.
Look, I want to get off for any reason. Just pull this out right here.
All right.
That's your emergency panic.
I got it. James!
This is going to be cool, sir.
All right.
You really got to be close to hear this.
Yeah, that's Justin. But she stopped that joint. Would you like to try a 5?
That was a 2?
We want to do a lower one?
Wait a minute.
This monster's a kitty ride at Bush Gardens.
It's not a kiss ride. James, you want to get paid, right?
Now this one ain't bad at all. This is a kitty ride.
Okay, James, I need you to come right over here. First of all, I'd like to say, STEM is cool. This is Dr. Trina Coleman, host of Beyond the Classroom on HBCU iRadio and the HBCU Smart TV. I am in the Max Flight Simulator here, and I'm riding with Sean. Sean cannot take the Max Flight Simulator. Sean could not do the thing. It spins in 360 degrees and it goes, it's like a roller coaster ride. It's very cool. And if you're ever here in Hampton, Virginia, come to the Virginia Air and Space Center and ride the Max Flight Simulator, but do not ride it with Sean. Do not ride with Sean. This is Dr. Trina Coleman, Beyond the Classroom, HBCU iRadio. Sean's a cool guy though, just don't ride this thing with him. Well, welcome to Beyond the Classroom, Dr. Darden. I am pleased to have you here today.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be right here.
Well, I have so many questions for you. First of all, before I start asking questions, congratulations on your Congressional Medal of Honor. I don't know if my listeners and viewers know, but you won that medal along with the other ladies in Hidden Figures, and I just want to say congratulations. And let's start talking about the medal. How did that come about?
Well, thank you very much. Well, somebody decided that, I guess the book and the movie itself generated so much within this country that maybe it was worthy of medal. And I think, you know, they went up and showed the movie to the congressmen and the senators in Washington, and so I guess there some movement started that maybe these women should get a medal. Well, of course, I wasn't in the movie, but I was included in a small part of the book, and so I was, I guess, included in that group. And so eventually, I guess Senator Coons from Delaware decided, maybe he was the first, I'm not sure what, to submit a bill that would award a congressional medal to maybe the 4 women that were in the book, and Senator Bernice Johnson from Texas did the same thing for the House. I think there was some disagreement once it had been introduced into the Congress, and Bernice Johnson decided she wanted all the women to be honored in some way for the work, the support that they gave back during that time period. And so there was a 5th medal added that would recognize all of the women. And the medals themselves have not been made yet. They're in the design process. And from what I'm hearing, they think that should be completed by around September. So
okay, yes. I hear they're fancy medals. They do all, you know, your likeness and stuff on
well,
the medals?
you actually get a chance to talk to them about what you want on there
that's
and things
awesome.
Like that, yes.
Well, I think it's amazing that they actually did honor you ladies, because you deserved it. And one of the things that my generation likes about it is the fact that we get to know more about your work, because were it not for the book and the movie and things like that, you indeed were hidden to generations of girls like me and my colleagues and the ones that come behind us. So, you know, we actually stand on your shoulders, but we didn't know whose shoulders they were, you know. So the medal and the book and the movie, how's that change your life?
Well, the book itself changed my life because as soon as the movie came out and the book, you know, sort of together, a lot of the schools and everybody started showing the movie to students. And when they would show the movie to several hundred students and everything, they would NASA formed what they call the modern figures. And so they were calling in young minority females that were actually working at the different NASA centers. So they'd call in a few, and since I was still available to be called in, although I was retired, I would be called in to a number of places, and we would talk with the students about lessons learned in the movie.
Okay.
And things that they should pay attention to, and how those women worked, and how they were discriminated against, but they still did their jobs and they did them well.
Right.
And so we talk about that, and so I guess I did that for a while, but then there started to be a relay system where somebody who heard me one place would say, oh, well, can you come here and can you do this? And so for the last 3 years, it has been more of that somebody would hear me one place and want to invite me to something else or tell somebody else about me, and so it's been sort of a word of mouth. And so I've pretty much been all over the country
Yes, you have.
speaking to students. I'm supposed to go to Portland, Oregon this year, and
Wow.
I was at IBM and I was at Princeton recently, and so it has been a variety of things. Met a lot of wonderful people, been to a lot of wonderful conferences and things.
Yes.
Talking about my career and what I considered to be some things that pushed me in my career.
Oh, really? Such
Yes.
as?
Such as I went through segregated schools
Yes.
in North Carolina, of course, and when I finished high school, in the 11th grade, I decided that I liked geometry. But before that, the only class I'd had was algebra. And so after I decided that I really, really liked geometry, I said, I'm going to major in mathematics. So I come up here to college. There was nothing else for me to take after the 11th grade. I came to Hampton Institute to major in math, and of course found out that everybody coming here to major in math had trigonometry and analytical geometry and calculus, and I had plain geometry. So I'm thinking about that, and I'm saying, well, I'll just have to start where I am and learn, you know. But then my dad called, and he said, Christine, he says, I'm not sure that there are that many jobs for an African-American female as a mathematician in 1958. And he says, and I'm thinking maybe you should get a teacher's certificate. And so I started thinking about that, but I had this almost like a formula in my head from somewhere, probably from home and from school and everything. But it was, if you know what your passion is, if you know what you really like, and I had kind of discovered that I really liked the math and physical science rather than biological sciences and things like that. And so it says you perceive of yourself in a job like that. First P. Second P, plan what you have to do to get to a job like that. Then 3, prepare, work that plan that you laid out. And the 4th P is persevere. Don't quit. Keep marching toward that job. And so I had thought about that. I had, you know, math is something I'd really like to do. And but then I says, well, my dad wanted to make sure I would get a job when I got out. That's what he was thinking about.
Right.
So I said, I'm going to do what my dad said. I'm going to get a teacher certificate with mathematics as the major and physics as the minor. And I did that. But then I added, because of this thinking that I had done, I said, what else I'm going to do my freshman year is all of the mathematics courses that I don't have to take going into teacher education, but these other students are taking, I'm going to take them as electives. And so most of those electives came in my senior year. So my senior year, I did my student teaching in math. I took 4 math courses. Second semester, I did my student teaching in physics 4 math courses. And in actually one of those 4 math courses, I was taking 2 the same times because I skipped a class my sophomore year that I had to have for teacher education, and I wasn't going to graduate if I didn't take it. And it came the same time as calculus, advanced calculus. And so I went to the registrar of the school and said, can I take them both? And they let me take both of them. And so I attended the calculus class, and I only did the reading on my own and only went to take the exams for the other class.
Wow. That's
and so I
amazing.
graduated with about 24 hours of math that I didn't have to graduate, and my teacher certificate. Yes.
That's awesome. And it's awesome that you're a Hampton Pirate, of course.
Yes.
And then you, I just want to talk about the HBCU experience for a minute. Being a graduate of Hampton and then going to Virginia State to get your master's degree, and then going on to your work at NASA based on your plan with the 4 Ps. Is that how, did it work out the way?
Well, I can
the
kind of
4
explain
Ps?
how it started to work.
Okay.
So after I the day that I graduated, I had a card to go interview for a teaching job.
Okay.
And so one of my math teachers said, I'll drive you there after graduation. So my parents took all my belongings back to North Carolina, and I went down to Lawrenceville and interviewed for a job at Russell High School there in Lawrenceville and accepted it.
Okay.
And so when I got home, of course, I had an offer from Charlotte, but I says, well, I've got a job now, so I can't go to Charlotte. I will go back there. So as soon as I went back to report for work in the fall, some of the teachers came to meet me and said, hey, you know, Virginia State College offers in-service classes to teachers free of charge.
Really?
And so we go up there on Saturday mornings, and we wanted to know if you'd like to go with us. And I said, yeah, that would be great. So I went with them up that Saturday morning and signed up for another math class, and probably met the head of the math department at that time. But I went through that year. Everything went well. Took a class there, and then I guess 2 or 3 years later, I had married, and I was back in Portsmouth, Virginia, and teaching at Norcom High School.
Oh, okay.
And then I got with the other teachers I'm teaching with and said, hey, Virginia State teaches these classes free of charge to teachers in the system. How many of you would like to go up and do that? And so problem was it was Friday night this year.
Oh.
And Petersburg was 60 miles away from Lawrenceville. It was 80 miles away from here. And so I got one carload of teachers to go. And so we went up to Petersburg and we signed up for the class. And the first semester I thought went very well. Until the end of the first semester, when all the teachers came to me and said, well, we aren't going the second semester. I said, oh my goodness. I said, okay, I don't want to quit.
Okay.
I really want to keep on doing what I'm doing. And so I says, I don't want to drive by myself either, but I'm going to do it. So on Friday nights, I would work all day, and then I would leave and drive to Petersburg.
Wow.
And then I would sit there for about 3 hours in the class and head back home about 10:30 at night.
Wow.
And as I tell the students most of the time, by the time I was headed home, I'd have my head hanging out the window so I wouldn't fall asleep. Yes. But I was glad I did that, because about a month into the semester, my husband got a fellowship to go to Virginia State and work on a master's degree in biology.
Okay.
He had gone there in undergraduate school. And so I said, well, you know, it looks like I might need to find a job up there somewhere if we're going to be moving here. And so I applied to all the schools around Petersburg. Chesterfield County wrote me back for a letter of recommendation. And so I went to my principal over at Norcom and asked if he'd give me a letter. He says, of course I will. He says, but I don't want to be looking for a math teacher in August. He says, I'd like for you to give me your contract back, and in exchange for this letter. So I says, well, I'm going to get this job. I'm going to be positive about this thing. So he wrote the letter, and I gave him my contract back, and I never heard another word from Chesterfield County.
What?
So after 2 or 3 weeks, several weeks, and I had not heard any more from them. When I went to my class on Friday night, I went up to Dr. McDaniels, who was teaching the class, and said, it looks like we might be moving in this area, and I was wondering if you knew of any jobs in the area I might look into as possible jobs. He said, you might be moving here. I said, yes. He said, and you're looking for something to do? And I said, yes. He says, well, let me take you across the hall to the head of the physics department. He's looking for a research assistant in aerosol physics.
Oh, that's
so
how you got into physics.
We walked over to the Dr. Hodkinson's office and talked to him. And before I left that office that night, I had been offered this research assistantship, and I had it. And so that's what I did, and that was going to pay for me to get a master's degree also. My
Yes.
research was going to be in light scattering of non-spherical particles.
Okay.
But then, since it was going to pay for me to get a master's degree, in taking all of my mathematics courses that I had realized that it was the applied mathematics that I really liked, kind of in combination with the physics and everything. And so I signed up for going to school to get a master's degree in applied mathematics.
Okay.
And so that is what I did, and actually had some pretty good teachers that year and everything, and lived on camp. Well, no, we lived in a house in Chesterfield County that first year.
Oh, okay.
And so for 2 years I was of course doing this work and writing a dissertation and things like that. And and then when I got ready to graduate, I said I actually applied to Hampton Institute. I applied to Norfolk State. And Dr. Daniels, who was the president of the combined Norfolk State, Virginia State program, lived right across the street from me. And I says, well, put a good word in for me that I'm applying for a job down there. He says, okay, you know. And but then, so I applied there. And then I says, well, let me go by the placement office. So I found where it was. I didn't even know where it was. I went by the placement office and said, well, I'm graduating with a degree in applied mathematics. I'm wondering if you know of any positions I might look into. She said, where have you been? I said, huh? Didn't you know NASA was here recruiting yesterday? I said, no, I didn't know NASA was here recruiting yesterday. I guess I wasn't frequenting the places where students would see the posters and everything, so I didn't know anything about it. She said, well, they were here yesterday. You take this application and fill it out and bring it back to me. I'm gonna mail it in. I took it and I filled it out. I gave it back to her. She mailed it in, and 3 weeks later, I had offers from NASA, from Hampton Institute, and from Norfolk State University.
Well, that's an amazing story. We're going to take a short break, Dr. Darden, and when we come back to Beyond the Classroom, we're going to continue our conversation with Dr. Christine Darden and her amazing journey from North Carolina through Hampton Institute, through Virginia State, Petersburg, Chesterfield County, and NASA. We will be right back.
If you can describe one word about me, it's unconventional. My whole life is unconventional. So I made the decision to graduate high school at the age of 15 in September 17, 2007. It was tough. It was tough and tiring. So I really had to buckle down and really just grind.
Jalal Hayes.
I became the youngest PhD to graduate with an applied chemistry degree from Delaware State University. I am Dr. Jalal Kill Hayes, and I'm a research chemist and educator.
Welcome back to Beyond the Classroom. We're talking with Dr. Christine Darden today, and we're going to talk to her about so many things. And I wish we had more time so we could just talk indefinitely, but here on HBCU Smart TV and HBCU iRadio, we're going to learn about her journey and her path to getting that congressional medal. So Dr. Darden, you were telling us about all these job offers that were pouring in when you didn't have any job offers at first. So NASA sent you an offer, Hampton Institute sent you an offer, and who else?
Norfolk State.
Norfolk State. So what'd you do when you got all that?
So as I talked with my husband about these offers, the NASA offer was $9,000. The Hampton Institute offer was $4,000, and the Norfolk State offer was $4,000.
Okay.
So he didn't hesitate too long to say,
As a
take
mathematician?
NASA.
Mathematician should have been able to get that one real easily. Yes. Wow.
So I did take the NASA job. I didn't really realize exactly what the job was. You know, this is the offer. I had never sent them anything other than that application. Yes. And so I was hired as a data analyst. That was my official title.
Yes.
Going there. But they had called me just before to even ask what was the classes I took or something, because they didn't have a transcript for me or anything. And so anyway, when I got there and signed in, I found out I was assigned to the reentry physics branch in the hypersonics area there at NASA Langley. And then I found out I was in the computer office.
Okay.
Which is where the term computer comes from.
Okay.
And the computer office was not segregated like it was in the movie, because once NACA became NASA, then the segregation in the offices went away.
HBCU Nation, this is Dr. Trina Coleman, host of Beyond the Classroom. Now, if you caught an episode of Beyond the Classroom on HBCU Smart TV, you may have seen me doing some of this, because I love coffee. I am always drinking coffee, particularly when I'm doing interviews. So if you want to see your mug up here with your logo of your company, organization, or whatever, you just want to see your face on Beyond the Classroom and let the thousands of other people that are watching Beyond the Classroom see your logo associated with your business or organization, then go to our Facebook page, HBCU Smart TV, and leave us a message. We'll get back to you and let you know what next steps are. You can also go to Beyond the Classroom's Facebook page at btc.stem, btc.stem. Leave us a message, post it on the page, say, I want to see my logo on Beyond the Classroom. And I want all the other thousands of people that are watching on Smart TV to see it too. All right? And you know what? I love my coffee, so there will always be a mug in my hand. Beyond the Classroom is back, and we are talking to Dr. Christine Darden, and she's telling us about her tenure at NASA and how she became a part of the computer pool. So continue, please, Dr. Darden.
Okay, when I signed in, we were on the east side of Langley, over by the Air Force. And then they told me to drive back to the new section, the west side, which was NASA. And I found out then that I was going into the reentry physics branch, which had all of the kind of hypersonic tunnels around in that area.
Can you break that down a little bit?
And hypersonic, okay,
yes.
The speed of sound is the sonic speed, and supersonic means you're going up to 2, 3, 4 times the speed of sound. When you get up to about 5 times the speed of sound, they start calling it hypersonic, because you actually start to get chemical changes in the atmosphere. It is because of the heat and everything, and there are some different characteristics of the flow at that. In that area. So supersonic speeds, would be Mach 1, and Mach is the phrase they use. Mach 1 is the speed of sound, Mach 2 is 2 times the speed of sound, named after a person who discovered what an impact that can have on analyzing the flow of the speeds when it's going through different Mach numbers.
That's pretty cool.
Yes, and so there were 4 or 5 people in the office, and I get there and I've got a mechanical calculator sitting on my desk. I was given some French curves because I had to learn how to draw a good curve. The calculator, I didn't know how to work that well either, but I guess I'd learned some things that the office did. The people were telling me what they did. The engineers' offices were across the hall, and they were. One of the things that the reentry physics branch did, working with others, was to determine the speed and the attitude at which a space vehicle comes back in the atmosphere. So you don't want it to get too hot that it would burn up the vehicle. you also don't want it to come in at an angle where it would bounce on the atmosphere and go back out into space. And so that group was responsible for doing that. And so some of the things that they used would have been the hypersonic tunnels and the very high speeds that the vehicle is traveling at when it's coming back in. And so, and those wind tunnels, I don't know if you've been to Langley or not, but the huge spheres out there.
Yes.
One of the things I certainly learned was that they could hook a couple of the spheres together. They would put maybe helium, high pressure helium in one sphere. They would make a vacuum in the other sphere, and there would be a barrier between the two. And then when you release the barrier or remove the barrier, then the air flows from the high pressure helium into, and so it could reach very high speeds, Mach 10, 15, and so forth, that the vehicles are actually traveling in outer space. And so that would be a blowdown test, because the test could only last seconds, as long as it took for the helium to get into the other sphere. Yes. And so they did a lot of those there, and they had some other tunnels in the facility too. And so most of the women in the computer office actually worked with some of the tunnels within the building and around there, and they would evaluate the data coming out of the tunnel. They might be plotting the data that came out of the tunnel. This was actually before you could depend on your computer to do all your plots and everything.
You had the hand plotted.
Yes, so there was one lady sitting in the office, and she would sit there all day, kind of had some instruments in her hand, and she would you know, do this and look, and then she'd get busy, and it was almost like I think about Jefferson, where you can get a duplicate of what you're writing because you have your pen thing down in a recess, and it does this. Well, I went over there one day and I said, "Could you tell me what you're doing?" I said, because I just didn't know. She was doing the labels and the figures and the titles and everything for the final figures.
Oh.
Because she had to do this by hand, and so she had a set of instruments called Leroy instruments, which had all the alphabet and numbers in these rulers, and if you put the base of your drawing thing in it, it would guide you so that you're transferring the letters and the alphabet and everything on the figures.
See one of those.
Well, that's what she had, and that's the only one I've ever seen.
Oh well, so much for that.
Yeah, but it was like duplicating something from a ruler over here, and I believe Jefferson had done something like that. Maybe I saw it at Monticello. I don't know.
So you guys did a lot of work in the computer pool.
Yeah, so yeah, they were actually, because you know, when they started hiring a lot of these women, they were there to help write papers about what was going on at the center, and to develop the results of tests and things like that, and send them to the other people that were building airplanes. So all of the military bases, the companies that existed that built airplanes at this time. And that happened because back during World War I, airplane was invented here, but toward the end of World War I, the Europeans, the French, and the Germans had made more advances in their airplanes than America had. And so somebody went to President Wilson, I think was his name at that time, and said, we need to coordinate the aeronautical research in this country. And so he created the NACA, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, to manage that program. And so they chose their first plot of land here in Hampton, Virginia. And they built this huge laboratory out there, and they started building all these tunnels and everything. And when they only had men there to start getting this data and reducing it, the men said, we can't do all this with just our slide rules. And so they decided they would start hiring women.
Right.
And in 1935, they hired their first group of white female mathematics majors. And then just before World War II, in the early 40s, A. Philip Randolph went to President Roosevelt and said, you should do an executive order to say that there can be no discrimination in hiring for any defense industry. Well, NACA was considered defense, and that opened the door for black females to be hired. And Dorothy Vaughan was in that first class of black females in 1943.
Wow.
And so that's how the women got there. So that was pretty much their job. And so, yes, I did have to plot some points, and then I had to learn how to draw an even curve through those points and make sure it could be a good final figure for a report that would be going out and things like that.
Wow.
But I could program when I got there. So when an engineer came and wanted me to solve an equation or something like that, rather than trying to do it on a mechanical calculator, I would write a program and do it, because I'd learned to program in Fortran in graduate school.
Yes. Fortran is the universal language of science.
And so I did that for about 4 or 5 years. The engineers would come in with something for me to do, and I would do it and give them the results and everything. And finally I said, well, you know, the equations that they're bringing me are just like the equations I studied in graduate school. I guess they are, you know, doing that because they have engineering degrees, and I've just got a mathematics degree. And somebody heard me kind of thinking out loud saying this, and they said, no, several men over there don't have engineering degrees, they have mathematics degrees. I said, oh, is that right? So I said, I'm going to ask about transferring to engineering. So I did ask my immediate supervisor about transferring, and I was told no, they didn't think that was possible. And so I sat there and thought about it for 2 or 3 weeks and decided, well, I'm going to hire position in the organization and ask about the transferring, knowing that I'm now going around somebody who had said I couldn't do something and I could get fired. Well, I said, well, if I get fired, I had an office to teach before I came here. I could probably go find an office to teach, and I was ready to do that. So I made an appointment with one of the directors, and I said, I'd just like to ask you a couple of questions. I'd like to know why a male and a female coming here with pretty much the same background are assigned to such different jobs. The men are put in an engineering area where they do research, they give talks, they write papers, they publish papers, and they get promoted. The women, for the most part, and this was all the women, were put more or less in computer pools where they didn't really do research. They did what the engineers were asking them to do. They did not do research, they did not give talks, they did not write papers, they did not publish papers, and it was difficult to even get their name on some of the published papers. And he looked at me when I finished my question, and he says, you know, nobody's ever asked me that before. And I said, well, I'm asking you now. And we said a few other words, and then I went back to my office. And 3 weeks later, I got promoted and I got transferred.
Awesome.
So that's how I got into the engineering area. And the other thing that had just happened in this country was that the Russians, the English and the French and the United States were all planning on building a supersonic transport. And as a part of preparing to build the supersonic transport, the United States says we're going to do some flight tests over Oklahoma City and Chicago. So they got some military supersonic airplanes, and they flew over these two cities, and they had banks of people answering phones with the complaints of the sonic boom that was happening in these two cities.
I can imagine.
Yes,
Wow.
and so they got so many complaints that in 1971, the United States decided to cancel their supersonic transport. They had selected Boeing, but they said, no, we're not going to build it. And not only did they cancel the supersonic transport, in 1973, they established a law that said no commercial airplanes could fly supersonically over the continental United States.
Wow.
So that took away all the sonic booms we used to hear as kids and everything. So that's what happened. And I was put in this office that had been generated to see if it could work on minimizing the sonic boom. And so my first assignment, my new boss walked in and gave me a technical paper from Cornell University by a couple of professors who had put into a report some of their ideas about designing the airplane differently to reduce the sonic boom. And they were actually, this was all coming from people who had started working in the 50s about ideas they had had and how it had been combined in this report. And he says to me, well, it was full of equations in the report. He says, I want you to look at these equations in this report and solve it and write a program that would do what this report says. A couple of things were wrong. It had a direct delta function at the front of the nose of this airplane, and it also did not use the real atmosphere. It had used an isothermal, so there were some approximations in what they had done. So I wrote the computer program, solved all the equations and everything, and then ultimately went back and made it the real atmosphere, and then ultimately changed the direct delta function to a series of triangles about which you could talk about how big it was, how wide the base was, and everything, because the direct delta function would have increased the drag of the airplane, which we did not want to do.
Right.
And so once everything was running, I had moved to another branch, supersonic branch down by the supersonic tunnels, and one guy was working with me. And so once the program started working, we both started designing airplanes. We would give the input of the system. What was the Mach number? How fast were you going? What was the weight of the airplane? What was the length of the airplane? And what was the altitude at which you were flying?
Wow.
And it would output something called the equivalent area distribution of the airplane. And that was, if you designed an airplane that matched that equivalent area distribution, you were supposedly getting a minimizing sonic boom for those conditions.
Well, that's awesome.
And so that's what we did. We designed the airplanes. We matched the equivalent area distribution out of this code. We sent the designs off to have the airplane built. It's a stainless steel airplane, costing about $7,000 because they had the thicknesses and everything had to be exact. All the while I was there, everybody was using that. And because we didn't have the computational codes right then, because of, well, the computers were just coming in when I came in. People were just learning to program.
Right.
And,
I remember that was back like in the early 70s.
Early 70s
Yes.
then. Yeah, I came in 67, and then by the time I started working on this, I'd been there about 5 years.
Okay, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk some more with Dr. Darden, and we're going to talk about these airplanes. We're sitting here in the Virginia Air and Space Center, and there are planes all around us, and I wanted just to get some information.
Are you going to test me on airplanes?
Yes, we're going to test you on airplanes, Dr. Darden.
said we want to do a flight test
Okay.
to validate these designs. So DARPA borrowed 2 F-5s from the Air Force.
Because they can do that.
But yes, so they borrowed the
Yes.
2 F-5s using the code that we had of the area that needed to be on to change this to the design we needed. They put panels on one of those F-5s. They did not do anything to the second F-5. They flew these 2 airplanes over the Mojave Desert out in California, and they measured the signatures. I was not out there when they did that flight, but a friend of mine in the control room called me, and you could hear the shouting in the room as the data came back into the control room, because it worked. The airplane that had no modifications gave a big N wave. The airplane that had the modifications on it gave a much smaller shock and almost kind of like a flat signature.
Wow.
And so it worked. And so what we said, okay, now this modified airplane, I said it looked kind of like a porpoise because it was very short and stubby, and you know, supersonic airplanes don't look like that. So we actually said to NASA, well, now what needs to happen next is that you need to get a real airplane designer to combine the characteristics of a good supersonic airplane with the characteristics that we've now shown you that the low sonic boom airplane has to have. Okay, so we told them that, and you know, they are going to let us do this flight test later once they get that done. Build a full-scale airplane is expensive. So over the years, they didn't do anything, and they stopped doing NASA X planes. But another very interesting thing happened is that one of the guys who had worked at Glenn Research Center in engines, when I was working in engines in the high-speed research office, became the director of aeronautics for NASA. Lockheed Martin, in the meantime, one of the guys who had been at McDonnell Douglas with us and who worked with us, left McDonnell Douglas and went to work for Lockheed Martin Skunk Works. They had been doing some of these designs of integrating the supersonics and the low boom things. And so they, you know, talking to NASA and everything, they actually entered a competition about this airplane, this airplane design. They won that, and they won the contract, and they got $247 million to build their airplane. It was about 2 years ago. They're working on it right now. It should be finished in 2021. When they finish their airplane, they're going to carry it through its supersonic gyrations to make sure it's a good supersonic plane. Then they will fly it over different pockets of people all over the country and get their feedback on how loud it is. They say it is more like a thump.
Wow.
That
Have they
it
called
is
you?
very low. No, they haven't called me.
They haven't called you?
No. Some of the people that I worked with are actually running the program at NASA now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I've been gone 12 years.
So you still know what you know, though.
So anyway, they will carry it through that. They've also been working with the FAA that the data that they get from these people will be taken to the FAA, and we will ask NASA will ask the FAA to consider a rule change. And they're going to work with ICAO over in Europe and everything, because they would also have to accept the conditions to have a supersonic plane fly across.
That's
over there.
amazing. Regardless
So
of
that's
the fact
going
that you
right
retired,
now. Yes.
you still played a very instrumental role in getting this to where it is now. You can say, well,
I guess that's why I'm getting a congressional medal.
That's exactly right. Let me get a fist bump on that one. Yes.
But anyway, I mean, NASA had recognized me. I mean, I got NASA gold medals for the Sonic Boom program and things like that. And so my career went very well there.
It did. So when you go and speak to these students at these schools now, and what's the most frequently asked question that they ask you? Well,
they also ask me how I made decisions and how I went in a certain direction. And I think that P to the fourth power actually guided me in certain directions because I knew what I wanted to do.
Oh, okay.
And I think that I said I never would have signed up for 4 math classes at the same time.
Yes,
but I
that's
signed
a
up
lot.
for it. And do you know that my junior year and my senior year at Hampton University, I had a private room. So I did not have a roommate that was going to come in there and keep noise.
Were you in Kennedy?
So many. No, I never. I never. Virginia Cleveland was the only usual dormitory that I when I went there my freshman year. Sophomore year, I lived in the monastery. And then in the junior year, I went back early to help with the registration with the students and everything, and they had bought the nurses' dormitory across the street out there, Winona Hall.
Oh, okay.
And Winona had, I don't think any of the rooms were assigned, and I went in there and said, "You got any private rooms?" They said, "Yeah." I said, "Can I have one?" They said, "Yeah."
So
I got a
asking,
private
you shall
room. I
receive.
got a private room,
Yes.
and then my senior year, I was a senior dormitory counselor, so I got a private room, and
Yes.
so all of that helped me be able to study all this stuff in my room without interference.
That's a really smart strategy. They should have more private rooms. Then they make them bigger suites.
So it all worked out, and I worked as the director of several offices for the next 8 or 10 years, and then I retired. And I retired because my daughter, who was in California, no, she was in Colorado. She had 2 boys by then. This was my youngest daughter. And and her husband was being transferred from Colorado to Georgia.
Okay.
And she was working for a Dish Network out in Colorado. She called me and she said, Are you going to go on and retire and come out here and help me with these children? So I went on and retired and went out there and helped her with her children.
You didn't say those your kids.
And like I said, I was director of one of the technical offices. NASA changed how it funded projects pretty soon after I moved into management. And in that, Langley would lead a big project, but then Langley would have to make assignments of the money to the other NASA centers. Okay, you want to do this. Okay, you get this to do that. You get this money to do that. You get this to do that. Well, I headed the office at Langley, which managed all the projects that we got from other centers. And it included computational fluids, it included engines, it included air traffic management, it included something else. I think there were like 5 areas. So I ran that. Then I was the assistant director for the strategic planning at the center for several years. And then they combined public affairs and education into one office and made me head of that. And that's kind of how I closed out my career.
Yeah, you pretty much saw NASA as it developed into what it is now from what it was then.
Well, yeah.
And you helped it as well. So that deserves a congressional medal too, because it wasn't
so
just
anyway,
this
it was a great career. It was a great career. I enjoyed
awesome
that career very much. I, gave papers in Japan and Greece and Germany and everything, and worked primarily with men.
Yes, and as we wrap this up, I have one question. How would you advise a younger girl that's going into a STEM field to be enthusiastic about it and not believe all of the hype, even though the hype is real, because there are discriminatory practices and there are other things that you have to deal with, but your 4 Ps are there.
Well, the 4 Ps are there. The one when I told you about.
Do they still apply in this climate with
Well, I
political?
think
You got to add that 15 now for politics. Well, you have given us a lot of great, inspiring information, Dr. Darden, and it's been a pleasure having you on Beyond the Classroom.
I would say to you that my studies at Hampton Institute and my studies at Virginia State College just helped me tremendously.
Absolutely.
And of course my high school studies too.
Absolutely. Well,
But
thank you so
absolutely.
much for
Thank
being
you.
on.
Thank you very much. I
Thank
enjoyed
you.
it.
I enjoyed it too.